Hi, I'm Lance Humphreys. I'm the Executive Director of the Mount Vernon Place Conservancy. Welcome to Flower Mart. We are pleased to offer a panel discussion led by Local Color Flowers, highlighting the work of 3 local flower farmers. It is appropriately titled Grown Not Flown, the Story of Local Flowers. Enjoy.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion about local flowers in Maryland. I'm Ellen Frost. I'm the owner of Local Color Flowers, and I'm here with some of my flower farming friends, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves before we get started.
I can go. I'll go. I'm Elisa, and I have Two Boots Farm, and that's in Homestead, Maryland. So I'm about 45 minutes north of Baltimore City. We have a small farm. It's about 2 acres in production, and we mostly grow flowers, but also some produce. And we sell at a farmer's market in Roland Park on Sundays, the Johnny's Market, to lots of florists, and we do some wedding work and events. And right now, our big thing is plant sales. We have a lot of plants for sale, both online and we're doing pop-ups all over the place.
I'm Helen Campbell. I have Helen's Garden, and I grow just outside of the city, about 20 minutes from downtown Baltimore in northern Baltimore County in the Green Spring Valley area. And I grow in 2 locations. Everything is field grown, so I have no high tunnels or greenhouses. So my season is really dictated by the frost. And I sell to florists and designers. I sell to growls at Mays Chapel in Ruxton when I have excess availability. I do the Baltimore Museum of Industries Farmers Market in Federal Hill, and you can pick up bunches at Plantasia in Federal Hill, as well as the French Paradox Wine Shop. And I do a little bit of design work, some small number of weddings and events. And I also do monthly arrangements or individual arrangements when people want them.
Awesome.
And I grow on, I grow on, I think it's still less than an acre. So very small.
So with each farm, we're getting closer to the city and smaller. So I'm Maya Kosok. I run Hillen Homestead, an urban flower farm in Baltimore City. I grow on 2 different sites in Northeast Baltimore, near Clifton Park. And I am in my 9th season of farming. And I grow on about a 1/4 acre, but I grow super intensively. So I sell about over 100K primarily to florists in DC and Baltimore, as well as the Farm Alliance stand at the Saturday Farmers Market are my primary sales. And we all grow using sustainable practices. That's also worth mentioning.
It's so exciting to, even just in the introductions, even though I know you all, to hear how accessible local flowers are compared to, 10 or 15 years ago. It's really exciting just to hear all of the places that people can get local flowers. So we're here today to talk to you a little bit about the local flower movement and local flowers in Maryland specifically. I'm guessing that a lot of people are not familiar with the local flower industry in Maryland and maybe have not thought too much about where their flowers are coming from just in general. And if you think about local flowers, maybe the way you would think about local food, the local food movement became popular 15, 20 years ago when people started to be interested in where their food was coming from. And now we're starting to see people interested in where their flowers are coming from. And just a little bit of background, about 80% of the flowers sold in the United States come from outside of the United States. They come from flower-producing countries that are mostly close to the equator, places like Colombia and Ecuador and Kenya, and of course, a lot from the Netherlands, which is, sort of the flower capital of the world. And so when you think about the flowers that you buy at Trader Joe's or at, another grocery store, or sometimes even at your local florist, those flowers, for the most part, are coming from outside of the United States. And that wasn't always the case. So the floriculture industry in the United States started back as far as colonial times. People started designing flowers in the United States during colonial times. But what they were doing is they were either growing their own flowers and doing their own design, which we now in modern day call the farmer florist model, or they were designers who bought from farmers that were in their community. So farmers were growing outside of the city and they were coming in to sell in the city. And then those arrangements were sold to people that lived in that community as well. And that was the model for about 200 years. We forget that that's how things worked for a very long time. And it wasn't really until sort of the mid to late 60s that we started to see this change. And we started to see imported flowers becoming much more popular in the United States. And by the 80s, we had really flipped from before 1960, about 90% of the flowers sold here were grown in the United States. And by 1980, we had totally flipped that script so that 80% of the flowers now being sold here come from outside of the United States. And so probably in the last 20 or 25 years, we've seen more of an interest in bringing back the local flower economy. And that started, in the 80s, the Association of Specialty Cut Flower Growers and a lot of small growers that were growing in their community, just like the history tells us happened, and selling in their communities. And so we wanted to sort of highlight for you today some of the work being done in Maryland by Maryland growers, and to get you thinking a little bit about where your flowers come from, so that you can start to maybe look for local stuff a little bit more. So I'm going to ask our panelists to talk a little bit about why they think that sourcing locally or searching out local flowers is important, or why it's important for them to grow flowers. What's the benefit of sourcing locally? And anybody can jump in and answer.
Well, the one thing that was going through my head when you were talking about flowers being flown in from various countries, and I think people don't realize how much packaging is involved with shipping flowers. Mm-hmm. So number one, you have just the cost of shipping, the footprint that creates. But when florists receive flowers from that have been shipped from wholesalers, it can take up to an entire day to process, unpack the boxes, take the cellophane off, recut them, hydrate them because they're not in water. And I think that people don't see that end of it. So just the whole packaging thing. And I know, Ellen, as a florist who receives locally grown flowers, we harvest them into a bucket, and maybe it gets rubber banded, maybe it doesn't, but there's no cellophane and it's ready to go. Ellen can use that flower as soon as it comes through her door.
And as a business who's trying to, as an individual business, we're trying to reduce our footprint and be cautious and thoughtful about the kind of materials that we're bringing into the shop. It is a huge benefit to us that the farmers, don't use packaging, don't use plastic wrap, don't use, nothing's coming in boxes. Everything's coming in just a one reusable bucket. And that's it. And it's ready to go. And we can literally use it as soon as it comes in. So for sure, the environmental footprint is an important reason to choose local flowers.
So one thing that I would add, which Ellen is constantly sharing about, is just the uniqueness, the quality, and the seasonality of the product. And so it's the equivalent of getting, a vine fresh tomato in the summer versus a tomato imported from Mexico in January. You can taste the difference. And flowers that are shipped have actually been bred to be better for shipping, which often means they've lost their scent or some unique colors. And there's many crops that just cannot ship at all. And so you will never see them in a florist shop unless they're being sourced locally. And so just that for quality alone, and a lot of people think it's more expensive, but it often is not. It's really, there are many reasons to buy local for just quality reasons.
Totally. And vase life, when we talk about quality, one of the big things that is important to us as florists is vase life. And so we want to make sure that we are giving our customers flowers that are going to last as long as possible. Mm-hmm. And when you're shipping flowers, those flowers have often traveled for many days, 5, sometimes 6, sometimes 7 days before they even get to the florist shop. They've been out of water, they've been stressed. And so, of course, when you bring them home, they may not last very long. And there's clearly, frustration on the customer's point, because they're like, okay, well, I just spent $30 and this lasted a day or two. So now I don't really want to buy flowers because it seems like a waste of money. But our local flowers are often harvested, delivered to us, and taken, designed with and sent out the door on the same day or within a day. And so our customers really benefit from that because they're getting really the longest vase life, the freshest flowers that we can really provide. So that's definitely a huge reason to look for local flowers.
Absolutely. So Mother's Day is coming up, right? Huge. All the flower farmers and florists know that Mother's Day is probably, is it the biggest? It's either is it the biggest flower, economy week that there is? And in the past, I didn't have enough flowers that I was growing myself for some Mother's Day, so I would source some in from wholesalers. So I would source in some snapdragons or something like that, and it was probably coming from Colombia or something like that. And the quality was so bad. The flowers were already browning and dying as I was trying to use them, and it felt so terrible. And luckily now I've upped production enough that I don't have to do that. I don't have to source flowers from wholesalers, but you really do see the difference. Trying to put together Mother's Day flowers with something that is dying right before your eyes is you don't want to send that out the door. So yeah, local flowers are so much better to work with because you know that they're going to last so much longer.
For sure. And I want to encourage anyone who's watching today, if you have questions, you can type them right into the chat. And if we have time, we'll definitely answer questions as we go. So the next thing I kind of want to talk about a little bit, Maya touched on it, but I want to talk just a little bit more about it. And that's the idea of seasonality. And one of the big, for us, we see the benefit of using a seasonal product because you're really using it when it's at its peak and not trying to produce something out of season. So not trying to, for us as florists, not trying to promise a design made with a flower that's out of season and really celebrating the flowers that are in season when they're available. And so do you guys have anything you want to add about seasonality or sort of the difference, because it really is different than buying from a wholesaler where it's like going to the grocery store. I know we keep coming back to food, but it's such a good metaphor. It's like if you go to the grocery store, there's every vegetable available, no matter the season. But if you go to a farmer's market, you're going to find tomatoes when they're in season, and you're not going to find them in February. And so seasonality is really important for us as designers who use local flowers, but also for growers who are growing local flowers.
I can just share one little anecdote, which is that my mother, who, believe it or not, literally knows nothing about flowers. I brought her a bouquet I think March. I actually bought it from Ellen because it was before I had flowers. And I brought it to her and she kept saying, these just look so springy. And so even if you think you don't know, you do know, because colors reflect the season. A lot of what we use are things that either have a wild cousin that grows in the landscape or really mimic what's in bloom. We don't grow wildflowers, we grow cultivated flowers, but they often have that more sort of garden fresh or wild look. And so it is reflected, and people do feel and notice the difference, even if they don't think that they do.
And I think as designers, the inspiration comes from whatever the flowers you have in front of you are. So that if you're ordering an arrangement, Ellen is going to she's not going to make the same thing every week or whatever. It's going to be inspired by the flowers. And that's what is going to make that difference that your mother saw between the one that she got from Ellen and maybe one that she got from a more traditional florist that maybe is using the same plant, the same material week after week after week. And their designs look the same all the time.
And I think as a designer who uses local flowers, and there's lots around that do now. I mean, we didn't have as many, in years past, but there's many more designers that are using local flowers now. That's one of the things that set our designs apart is that this is like every day now, like every day our designs look different because flowers are coming on so quickly right now that we are, every day seeing, okay, tulips today are done. And tomorrow peonies are starting and the designs are totally different once those flowers change. And so we are able to keep our customers sort of engaged and interested in the stories and interested in seasonality rather than just being a florist who has a recipe and, they make the recipe every day, all day for the whole year. That's one of the big benefits, I think. And we do have a question, and I know
I was going to chime in on that.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Anecdotally, I just wanted it reminded me that at Valentine's Day, which is another huge holiday, Lana at Fleur de Lis, she, on her website, she had a specific, like locally grown bouquet or arrangement was an option. And she said that was her best seller. So I thought that was just so encouraging that
That's
she
so
put
great
it out there and that really was in high demand. So ask your florists for local flowers, and that will encourage them to use more and more of them.
Yeah. Mai, did you want to add something?
Well, this also will answer those questions. So, and you touched on this, Ellen, but one of the questions was what's in bloom right now, and it is literally changing by the day. I went out yesterday. Don't tell any other florists because they're going to want all of them, but my peonies started blooming.
I saw that.
I was like, what? That literally just happened between the day that I was there before and that day. So
yeah.
we're kind of in this transition time where I sort of break it into early spring and late spring. Some of the early spring things like tulips and flowering branches are really, and daffodils are really winding down. And then we're getting into ranunculus and peonies. And then we're just starting to get into more of what we call the hardy annuals that are planted in the fall, overwintered with just a little bit of protection, not in a greenhouse. I mean, you can do it in a greenhouse, but Helen and I are both doing this in the field. And so we're just starting to get into foxglove and then a lot of flowers people might not even know, but nigella, love in a mist, orlea, white lace flower. I mean, lots of agrostemma, corncockle, bachelor's buttons. Yes, all these flowers that are just starting to come in. Some just in time for Mother's Day. Many will be literally the week after Mother's Day.
Yeah.
And so part of what's really cool as a grower and also as a designer is, I mean, if I messed something up in my tulip crop, a great and a terrible thing is I wait an entire year, but then I get a restart. And so I get to try again and do different varieties and plant it in a different way. And it's taken me years to really have a bountiful ranunculus harvest for Mother's Day because I had to really tweak my planting and varieties and all these things. And similarly, designers, I have designers who are like, oh, I got one bunch of this last week and I love it. Can I get 10 next week? And I'm like, next year.
Nope.
And so having that, but it also builds excitement for customers. And there's so much memory built in both with scent and with flowers and with seasons. So when that comes on, you're like, oh, now we're back at this time of year where I had tulips in my wedding bouquet because this is that time of year again. Or, I mean, I didn't, but lots of people do.
And I think that this year has been a particularly interesting year with COVID because, at least for us as designers, we have a lot of customers who started getting subscriptions when they were home because of COVID. And now they've gone a full year of their subscription and they're like, oh, those fancy tulips are back. Oh, that, one time I got Star Bethlehem, that's back. Like people, and it's great for us because I feel like we're teaching people about flower seasonality, which is not something as familiar as food seasonality. So we're starting to help people learn what's available when in our region. And it's great. It's great fun.
Speaking of which, what flowers do you have in the winter, Ellen?
I see that somebody asked, is there a time during the year when no flowers are available locally in Maryland? And I'll tell you that we are a florist that uses local flowers year round. Many florists use local flowers during the field season, and then maybe alternatively use conventionally sourced flowers in the off season. We are a little bit different in that we do source locally year round. And so while there are no field grown flowers in the winter, there are lots of flower farmers that do grow flowers in the winter in heated greenhouses and hoop houses. And so we source from about a dozen or so growers that grow in greenhouses from frost, which, is like the end of October in our region, mid to end of October, right through to when our first field flowers come on mid-March. And so we do have local flowers available year round. They are definitely not as plentiful, but each year we have more growers that are growing in the winter. And so sourcing in the winter slowly, I think, is becoming more of an option for florists that are interested in that. And okay, so we do have one other question that we'll maybe jump into, and then we can come back to our. So somebody asked what the price difference is between locally sourced flowers and flowers you would get at the wholesaler. I don't know if anybody wants to jump in on that, or I can take it.
I don't feel like I have enough knowledge about wholesale. Go for it, Ellen.
So I think that the way that I think about it is that there are there's like, it's not apples to apples comparison. So in one way you think, okay, well, are long stem roses more expensive in Maryland locally than they are at the wholesaler? Well, we don't have those locally. We have one rose grower in Baltimore that's growing very specialty roses, but we don't really have access to roses on like a large scale. Same with carnations or astromeria or waxflower. A lot of the flowers that you see at the wholesaler that may be less expensive, because how we think of those flowers is like they're commodity flowers. They are flowers that are grown on huge, huge farms, factory farms in South America. There's no real way to differentiate them. Like a rose is a rose. A long stem rose at the wholesaler is the same long stem rose you get at the grocery store. Those are very cheap for a lot of reasons. Land is cheaper. There's less environmental regulations. There's less employment regulations. There's a lot of reasons for that. So sometimes we don't even have a flower growing locally that we can compare to what the wholesaler has. Sometimes local flowers are less expensive than what you're finding at the wholesaler because they're in season and they are really plentiful in our market. So you might have something like, I don't know, larkspur, where every flower farmer in Maryland is growing larkspur. It's ready over 2 weeks. It's got to be sold. That price may be less than what you're finding at the wholesaler because the wholesaler may be shipping it from, somewhere else. And then there are a lot of flowers that are going to be more expensive than what you get at the wholesaler, because this goes back to the idea, I use this reference for food again. When you think about going to a farm to table restaurant, someplace like Woodbury Kitchen, you think about the whole experience of getting that local food. You get a menu that tells you where that's from. You get your server to tell you a story about the farm that those vegetables came from. And then you buy a $14 salad that is a very small plate of food grown by very professional, specialized farmers in our region. And so some of the flowers that you buy locally are going to be like that. You are going to pay a premium for them for those reasons. And so it's hard to say just yes or no. One's more expensive, one's cheaper. It really depends on the flower, the time of year, the season, and who's selling it. So
And
I know
you
that's
might find at a farmer's market, you might find a dirty jar of really cheap zinnias stuffed in a jar, and it's $6, and it's going to be different than even a specialty variety of zinnia or a dahlia. Or so even within local, not all local is created equal, which still any local is better than non-local, but there's going to be a price range within that.
Sure. And I think Maya brings up zinnias as a good example, because there are also flowers, like we said, that don't ship well, that you wouldn't even see at the wholesaler. So you're not probably going to see specialty zinnias. You're probably not going to see fancy cosmos or poppies, or, you're not going to see a lot of the stuff that's grown locally at the wholesaler. So there's both. You're going to find things at the wholesaler you can't find locally, and vice versa. So that was a great question. Thank you. So we're coming to the end of our time, but there's a couple other things I want to just mention. Maybe you guys can say a little bit about if people are interested in starting maybe their own cutting garden, or maybe now they're like, ooh, local flowers, I want to get in on that fun. What are some tips for people either to start a cutting garden? Where can they source seeds or plants? Like, how can they get started growing their own flowers?
Well, I'll just jump right in right here that, yeah, we are selling plants right now, both vegetable plants and cut flower plants to home gardeners. So we do the Johnny's Market in Roland Park on Sundays, and that's from 8 to 11, and that's at 4800 Roland Ave. So that's every Sunday. We'll have plants there tomorrow. And then next Saturday, we're going to open up our farm for one day only. So people could come to our farm next Saturday to pick up some plants from us. And then we'll be at the filling station in Sparks, Baltimore County on Sunday, so Mother's Day. And we'll have cut flowers both of those days as well, and lots of plants. So I love getting people started on their little cutting gardens. And that brings a lot of joy to me. And we did a lot of the hard work for you of just starting the seeds in our greenhouse and getting them ready so that you can put them in the ground.
So I would say one book that is kind of like the Bible for growers, and it's written both in a way that home gardeners and commercial growers can use it, is The Flower Farmer by Lynn Basinski. And along with that is really anything by Lisa Mason Ziegler, which is Cool Flowers is one of the books she's the most known for, which are those hardy annuals. And then and starting with seedlings and picking some of the easier to grow things, I highly recommend, as opposed to trying to start all of your seeds yourself. I don't even start most of my seeds myself. But there's a lot of local places to get seedlings and get started.
And just having a couple of pots will, if you're living in a small space or in the city, you don't need much space to really have some abundance and a lot of and blooms that will keep blooming when you cut. And the more you cut them, the more they bloom.
And to end, I wanted. This just made me think I was going to mention like where people can find local flowers in their own community. So in Baltimore, we can give you some resources, but in case you're not from Baltimore and you're watching this, there are flower farmers in most communities at most farmers markets these days. So you can search them out, but I wanted to mention the Maryland Grown Flowers website. Is that what it is? Maryland Grown Flowers.
MarylandGrownFlowers.com.
.com. And that lists really most of the flower farmers in our state, and gives a little bio about them, tells where they sell their flowers, how they sell their flowers. So that's a great resource for people to check out. You can find people on the Eastern Shore. You can find people in Western Maryland. Find flower farmers in your own communities. And you'll find, I think, just going back to like starting your own cutting garden, that a lot of our growers offer classes to help people with starting their cutting garden, starting seeds. They have lots of classes available. So check out growers in your community, look at their websites, and I think you'll find that there's a lot of resources already in your communities for helping you get started. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and I hope you'll reach out to any of us if you have questions about local flowers, if you want to buy local flowers. We are happy to answer any questions, and we look forward to seeing you at farmers markets, at our shop, and get out there and buy some local flowers this week. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.